Anyway, right. So I'm really pleased that we've got Rohan who's joined us. So this is one that I've kind of wanted for a while in terms of talk. So Rohan's head of product at NDS, so a digital services unit within NHS Scotland. He'll probably explain a wee bit about what they're doing. For those of you who don't know, prior to that, Rohan ran Mindfulness Everywhere, and he was the creator of Cara, Sleepfulness, Design of Mindfulness, and the best-selling hit Buddhify. Rohan's trustee of British Council, and he's also going to be a trustee in another charity. I don't know if he'll be allowed to say it. He might not be allowed to tell you that, but that's exciting. And he's also been named Wired Magazine's smart list of 50 people who will change the world. So no pressure.
That was a long time ago.
That was a while ago, but that's okay.
That still sneaks along in the bio.
What I would also say is, if you get a chance, is there's lots of, I guess, interesting content from Rohan on YouTube from a variety of sources. So after this, go and explore some of that and check out some of that. Christina's joined us. She's like in COVID testing situation just now. So this is like proper. Are you positive or negative? Are you allowed to tell us? This is exciting. It's like a grand reveal. Come on.
No, I'm just waiting on Finn's results. So
no,
don't know as yet. Watch this space.
Fingers crossed. I hope you're okay. Okay, right. I'm going to hand over to Rohan just now. Just a reminder as well, we are recording. So yeah.
Yeah, do you want to repost that? Just keep that reposting that link. Yeah, so I am going to use slides today, but some of you who will have done talks or presentations on Zoom will know that. Well, firstly, thanks for actively deciding to spend more time on Zoom, which is much appreciated and spending it with me. I think, and those of you, like I said, those of you who've done presentations or talks on Zoom will know that if you're using slides and you share those slides, you end up just seeing your screen, and you actually can't see anyone else. And so what I like to do, and I think Ross has done it before, is post some slides that you can open up on your browser or on it's a PDF, and then as I click through the slides, I'll do that awkward thing of saying, now please go to slide 2, but it means I can see your face and get some visual feedback with your nodding along or looking confused or similar. So please do feel free to open up those slides. Probably will work best if you, not through the browser, maybe if you download them and have them as a PDF through Acrobat, whatever, or Preview. So that said, please feel free to open your slides. And we'll start with slide 1 and just do some sort of basic sort of hello things. I guess, Ross, you said you've been sort of wanting to do this talk for a while. So Ross invited me whilst I was on a camping holiday in Suffolk, and a few weeks ago, and it's always and so I was delighted to join, and he sort of said, oh, please give me a title because I need a title for the promo. So I came up with this title, Accelerating Digital Change Against the Odds, and I was talking more about what I mean to that. But I think generally, like, I remember, Ross, I don't know whether you remember the first time we met, but maybe 8 years ago or 9 years ago, but Ross, you were the first person I ever met shortly after moving to Scotland whose go-to order at a chippy is pizza crunch supper. So that was a big moment for me, actually.
Don't look surprised, man. I'm a total scumbag. Everyone should, like, it's okay.
So I spent, I grew up in London, but I spent 10 years in Glasgow, and I recently turned 40, and I've been in the sort of reflective modes with those 2 milestones, I guess. And so when Ross asked me for a title, instead of, and I know a lot of other sort of DigiShift talks in the past have very much been around sort of experts sort of giving sort of quite expert talks on topics. And so the talk I'm doing today is more sort of offered much more in the spirit of inquiry than of expertise, as in, like, what's the question that I'm most interested in right now is how do you accelerate, like, given like because of obviously the pandemic situation, lots of organizations and individuals are low on resources in different types, and I'll talk more about that as well. But how do you still do progressive digital work in that environment, which has been sort of deepened by the COVID experience, but we've always typically resources always sort of fairly can be fairly scarce. And so the idea of against the odds is something that, or making change against the odds has been sort of a theme of my work, I guess, over the last sort of 10 years. I just want to talk about, so without sort of wanting to sound too sort of self-talky, but just to give a sense of where I'm coming from, because I got so I moved to Glasgow 10 years ago, and in that time I've done quite a lot of different things within public, private, and third sector. So it's sort of just so you can get a sense of where I'm coming from. So if you go to slide 2, you'll see. So the first 4 years in Scotland I was working for the Edinburgh festivals, and so I moved up to Scotland to be the first head of innovation for the Edinburgh festivals, and the work there was very much around all those organisations range from, so there are 12 what we call city festivals, so the ones that are sort of sponsored by City of Edinburgh Council, and they range from the very big, like the Fringe and the Edinburgh International Festival, to the really, really small, such as the Storytelling Festival or the Mela. And so the work we were doing there was around, given that all the organizations, they're all sort of very good arts organizations in that they knew what they were doing with regards to comms and technology generally, given the according to their scale and size and budget. But the job we were doing was looking at what can we do across the 12 as a set that allows them to do things that they could do together that they couldn't do separately. And most of that time was spent quite in sort of quite sort of backstage organizational work, but very rarely I was able to influence some of the work that happened on stage. And so this picture's from Hogmanay, January 1st, 2012, we ran a day called the New Year Games. Some of you may have attended, where we built out 4 quite big, playful social experiences in major Edinburgh venues. So this is a game of, I used to call it sort of What's the Time, Mr. Wolf, but it's a very dramatic game of What's the Time, Mr. Wolf in St. Giles Cathedral. So I started when I joined Glasgow. When I moved into Scotland, I was very much working in the arts and working in innovation in the arts. And then going to slide 3, off the back of the work and the festivals, we started. A lot of you might be on the call be familiar with the idea of sort of a hack day or hackathon, where you bring together a range of different digital and sector-specific talent and work in a sort of short period of time to test a lot and prototype a lot of ideas. So I ran a hack day called Culture Hack Scotland for 3 years in a row, and that led to a bunch of different work that I did with Creative Scotland, the main arts fund here in Scotland, including programs such as one called Geeks in Residence, where we placed designers and developers into small arts organizations to see so they could understand an organization from the inside and start doing work over a period of time rather than just a sort of 24-hour event. So, and then moving on to slide 4, I was doing all this work within arts and technology, and I decided because I had such a sort of network of developers and designers that I'd grown to know in Scotland through that work, and having spent so much time, essentially my whole career, sort of helping other people do cool digital things, I thought, well, it's quite nice to do one yourself. And so this was back in 2011, actually. I made my first meditation app. So meditation is just something I have a personal background in, and I made an app called Buddhify, which sort of took off a little bit, and over time became my full-time. So until very recently, it was my full-time work, making consumer-facing meditation apps on quite a limited budget. So I'll talk a bit more about that. Alongside the Buddhify was our main app, but we made a series of other side projects, most of which were failures, but that's fine. Slide 5. So on the sort of So while sort of arts and sort of small sort of startup-y type work was my sort of main work, I've been involved in charities mainly through trustee positions. So or sort of third sector organizations through trustee positions. So I was on the board of an organization called the British Council for 6 years, which is a very, very large charity, working sort of internationally in English teaching and cultural exchange and promoting in UK universities and so on. So I got to see what like enormous challenges that enormous charities have. That was a really sort of enlightening experience to see how even the biggest charities are facing the same problems that I'd seen in much smaller organizations in the arts in particular. Moving on to slide 6, as of pretty much a year ago, this is just a picture of people working at a computer, like but that's just the real life of when we had an office. I now work for NHS Scotland for a team called NDS, who are making some effectively quite sort of core infrastructural data infrastructure for Scotland. So when you're the fact that when you go to, say, you go into A&E and you have to say the same thing, repeat your story to 5 people in 3 hours, a lot of that, and often when you're handed off between your GP to someone in a hospital or into social care, that the information doesn't go with you because all the data systems are disjointed and siloed. So Scottish Government effectively a couple of years ago said enough is enough. We need to build better infrastructure that can share data across all parts of the system. And I'm part of a small but growing team within NHS Scotland whose job it is to start and work on that big project. And I sort of look at my portfolio is mainly around design and product management. So I have a team of product managers and service and UI designers working on products which allow you to share data like that. And obviously during this COVID time has been a pretty interesting place to be. We've been working on, we had a sort of fairly busy program of work, and then we got sort of disrupted obviously to work on a series of projects. So the things we've been working on recently have been, some of you know that, so the shielded population, so shielding is paused now, but the shielded population they were receiving food packages, and we were running the messaging system that allowed people to text in and receive those, so brokering the supermarkets with people in their houses via text message. And we're also starting work on vaccination. So as we get ready for, we're doing a lot of sort of data wrangling effectively on because flu vaccination is early this year, because if you really don't want to contract COVID and flu at the same time. So flu jabs are starting early, and so we're sort of helping with the systems related to that. So it's been really interesting moving from sort of creative sector into private sector, and then now into sort of the heart of public sector as well. And the final slide 7, or the final slide of this first bit, is just say that as sort of Ross said, so I haven't been on a board of a charity for a while, and so very recently have very kindly been invited to join the Board of Children of Scotland. It's very exciting to do that. To sort of support them with the sort of the digital brief, if you like, sort of what Ross would call a digital trustee. So I don't have much more to say. I haven't attended a full board meeting yet for that, so I don't have too much background in that. So moving to slide 3. So going back to the title of the talk, so accelerating digital change and against the odds. So I was going to sort of break that down a bit. So digital means there's so many things, but I think for me, sort of digital change over the last sort of 10 years for me sort of means 2 things. One is using technology to deliver your mission, and the second is actually decoupling the idea of digital from technology and making much more about behaviors and qualities and digital culture, And so digital change being as much about, being the flip side of the technology piece is that it's as much about encouraging the behaviors and qualities of participation, access, and accessibility, and I would argue playfulness as well in the work that you do. So I'm going to talk a bit about that, or that'll be a sort of theme. Moving on to slide 9, what does acceleration mean? So like the things tend to move slowly, and things tend to, if they move at all, they move slowly. And so as an agent of change or someone working in digital work, how do you ensure that the wider system supports your direction of travel as opposed to hinders it or blocks it or just lets it sort of flow away? Because there's a lot of inertia I found across the context that I've worked in. And so the need to accelerate things feels really, really, really important. And my sort of negative or cynical view of when it comes to pace of change, that sort of the idea of good is moving from terrible to not terrible, as opposed to like sort of, maybe that's my sort of hard-earned cynicism, but that's sort of my sort of position. Oh, just to say as a topper, like today I'm speaking very much as me, as opposed to I'm not speaking sort of on behalf of NHS Scotland or NDS or Children Scotland. I'm just talking mainly from my sort of experience overall in the last 10 years as a person. And slide 10, when I say sort of against the odds, what I mean is when you don't have the resources you need, which I just assume is sort of a default position for a lot of people working in sort of digital change or working in digital projects. And I guess what the thing I really want to sort of talk about today is like what are the resources that I found are most lacking, or and what can one do about it? So I want to talk about 4 different currencies, if that's all right. So the currency of money, the currency of leadership, the currency of what I'm going to call systems insight, which sounds a bit jargony, but hopefully will make sense, and the currency of energy, sort of human, personal energy and vitality and motivation. So what I'm going to do is just sort of talk a bit about all those 4 currencies or kinds of resource, and maybe just share some sort of experiences and stories related to those, because I think that's the context really for this is like how, moving into the public sector from a sort of small indie sort of private sector sort of startup-y kind of situation, and sort of faced with all the machinations and nuances and politics of public sector life. That's what made me really look back into my experience of like when in the past when things have been things haven't necessarily aligned to move things along as in the way that I would have wanted to do. Like, what can you really do to make that happen? And so these are the sort of the 4 reflections that I'm sort of keeping front of mind myself as I work in my sort of current context. And I guess my hope is that they sort of resonate a bit. So moving on to slide 11. So monies, I guess, is the obvious one when you think about currencies and you think about resources and not having enough. And so seems like an obvious place to start. And I think what I've seen or what I've learned about being in sort of resource constrained or financially constrained circumstances is when things have worked well, when things have not worked well, or work I've been involved in sort of has been invested in the wrong things. Often that's because it's taken what I would maybe say what I'm calling here an outside-in approach, is where an organization that I've either been running or being part of or has looked outside itself and seen the competition and seen the practice that the competition have been doing, and then the motivation for work has been the sort of I want that, or I want those results, or that's the shiny thing, or the feeling that the marketplace or the context is changing, and the drivers from a place of deficit and a place of like trying to fix an outside problem, or seeing a problem on the outside and trying to fix it, or responding in it from there. And the times when I've seen the sort of really effective digital practices, when organizations have taken a more of an asset-based approach, if you like, you'll be familiar with that terminology, but also like have started very much around values, and started digital work based on using technology to express what it's doing, express what it believes, express its values, express its mission in a really sort of authentic way. And that's really been I've seen that as a real differential, both across sort of commercial, creative and third sector contexts. And I think the example I'll give for this is within the context of the app work I did. So, we were a really small team, and those of you who know a bit about the meditation app space will know that there are two massive players. There's Headspace and Calm, who are two enormously well-funded, now American-based and California-based startups, conventional venture capital-backed startups, buying every possible sort of ads, sort of online advertising and sort of ad spend. So me as our team, and we just couldn't compete with it. And so we looked outside, and we saw that we tried to we tried initially to sort of take them up on take them on their own game, and realized that actually that was impossible, because just they could outspend us on everything, and it wasn't even, we'd be done within 6 months basically. So we decided to sort of flip that a bit and use small to our advantage. And we invested in the product. So that sort of goes without saying, is that the product itself is good and distinctive in the marketplace. But outside of that, we really invested in, we sort of made the sort of quite, at the time it felt like quite a dangerous decision, which was like, we're not going to spend any money on marketing, conventional marketing or advertising, and we're going to solely invest in the product and invest in the story. And so what I mean by that was that we completely changed how we presented the product, from the aesthetic to the language to the all the sort of content that went around it, be it on social media or otherwise, to be about to feel like it was it was a family business, or is a family business, but we really sort of amped up that aesthetic to make it feel really human and really relatable. And the idea there being that our competition was quite corporate and quite big, and if you wrote a support email or customer support email to us, you would have a response from one of the 5 people on the team page, and you can make a direct connection between the storytelling of our sort of presence, web presence, and also the experience as a user of the app or a customer of the app. And that really worked. That really led to, because what that meant is that although we weren't spending money on conventional marketing, what it led to was a real growth in sort of in word of mouth marketing results, in that people really bought into the story and the scale and the humanness that we were representing. And so whilst we absolutely, if you look at our books, we're nowhere near the scale, obviously, of a Headspace or Calm, but as a sort of sustainable indie sort of app business that started in sort of 2011, and being able to keep growing and keep doing interesting things, that worked. And I think that very much came down to this idea of being an inside out organization in a financially constrained environment. So the second example, if we go to slide 12, is this interesting? I'm just talking at the but cool. 2 thumbs up from Christine. Thank you. So go to slide 12. So I'm now going to talk about the currency of leadership. So I'll try and use gentle language. So what I've often found within, well, people who end up leading certainly sort of major sort of medium to large size, if not every kind of third sector or non-profit organization, very few of them have come from a digital background, because if you're my main sort of non-profit experience is in the arts, and so for example within the arts, you typically have a dual leadership structure where you have a artistic director, say of a theatre, or a lead curator or director of a gallery, and then you have maybe a sort of a chief executive, or so somebody who runs the organization, or somebody who runs the stage, if you like, or runs the program. And those leadership positions tend not to have a digital background. And the challenge there is that the sort of the literacy around digital practice and digital culture can be relatively low, or maybe just at the level, not necessarily at the level that needs to sort of accelerate progressive digital work or digital practice. And the moment that really sort of unlocked or made me sort of gain so much insight into this work, into this idea, and the importance of leadership and how you can actually change it or influence it was, so I was working with the Edinburgh festivals, and we were building a data platform where so that across all the 12 festivals to have a single way of representing an event, a show, so that you could then use that platform to populate websites or send information to the Scotsman. So in the old days, pre this system, the book festival would literally print out Excel spreadsheets of what then was in their program, walk it over to the Scotsman, and the Scotsman would then put it in their calendar. And nowadays there's a direct API feed from our data platform to the Scotsman. And so we were doing this sort of really important infrastructural sort of technical work, which made a lot of sense. And but at one point the Fringe hadn't signed it off, and they obviously like the big player in town. And Kath Mainland, who was the director at the time, fantastic, one of the best people working in the arts I've ever met, and now at the Melbourne Festival, they're very lucky to have her. I remember going to see Kath because she hadn't signed it off, and I sort of sat down with her and I was like, Kathy, look, we've agreed the business case, that's all agreed. The technology case, it was tricky, but we fixed all we know how it's going to work. But like, you're not like, what's the problem? You're not like, why are you holding back on it? And she just said, I just don't like it. I just don't like it. And I was like, finally, we're having we started having a conversation about the emotional and human aspect of being a leader in an arts organization, having to make a decision around technology, because that's what she was. So that's what we ended up having, was that she got it, but she didn't like it, and there was some fear and resistance in her, and obviously eventually she did sign it off. But that insight around it not necessarily being a bit like digital change in organizations, and certainly from a leadership position, isn't necessarily a financial thing or an organizational thing. It can be an emotional thing. And so that led us to running a bunch of events, which we called Digital Therapy, where we invited lots of senior leaders of arts organizations in Scotland. So directors of national organizations and big theatres and festivals and everything, and got them in a room together and and the invitation was basically, let's have the conversations around technology that you never have. And we ended up having a whole series of they were ended up being dinners actually, and because it's the arts, and it was incredible. It was all anonymous, and the kinds of things that people were saying were, you know, I've been an expert in my field for the last 25 years, and now I no longer feel like an expert. Or they said something like, you know, when I talk to the web agency running our website, I feel like I'm talking to my child. Or I don't even know how to use my phone. How am I supposed to sign off on this 200 grand commission? So these were the things that, like, the very real, like the real sort of like things that were stopping progress. It was all being masked by business casey stuff or technology casey stuff, when actually the things that were stopping people signing over the dotted line were around the emotional side and the fear and the doubt and the imposter syndrome and all these sort of very real things that people were feeling. And so that sort of experience has really sort of made me change my approach to how I try and influence people, to really try and meet them on, like, maybe it's part of my sort of mindfulness background as well, but like I get quite quickly into if there's any sort of friction in progressing a digital program or a lack of understanding of an idea, I move it quite quickly into an emotional conversation. It's like, what's not working here? Can we talk about the sort of this dynamic? And sometimes that, like, people tend to, like, sometimes that can be really uncomfortable for people, but sometimes people respond to it well. So that's been a big learning area for me. So let's move to the slide 13. I sort of rattled through the last bit so we can have more of a conversation. But so the other currency, this feels more abstract, but it actually feels really important, which is the currency of what I'm going to call systems insights. So there's sort of two dimensions to this. It'll probably make more sense if I articulate a bit. So often new projects and new initiatives, which most digital stuff tends to be, can be doomed because scale is rarely built in from the start. So I also call this pilotitis. You know, you look around public sector and it's littered with like a mountain of carcasses of digital projects which started and didn't really go anywhere. And how do you build in scale from the start? I don't have a very super clean answer to that, but I think the example that comes to mind is, or how do you build in sort of traction from the start? So going back to years to the hack days that we run, you know, like those of you who've been to sort of those kinds of events, you know, there's a lot of creativity and like loads of things get made and they tend to get sort of they're throwaway things, right? Because people attend very much as much for the process and the experience as for the output. And we deliberately set up our hack days to be very much about the experience and not taking the pressure off the having to have a very sort of specific output. But the example where the output really kicked on, that I think was interesting, was so it was with the Edinburgh Book Festival, where the mobile site. So unfortunately, there isn't a book festival last month. But well, there was, but not one in Charlotte Square Gardens. But if there was one, the mobile site that you would have used was one that started as a hack at one of our hack days, and the very sort of simple reason that happened was that the head of operation, I think the job title is head of operations, or the COO effectively of the book festival, was in the room, and when he saw something, he saw the sort of hack idea, which was very sort of half formed, and he saw why it wasn't going to work. And he gave the feedback really early on. So like, it doesn't do this, but if it did do this, then we could use it. And so a lot of it is just about making sure the right people are in the room at the right stage of a project. so that you're not pursuing directions or paths that are sort of doomed to fail. And it can feel very expensive in time, and of getting or of trying to get as much insight from people who really understand how the system works, because it's exciting to just get on with things. But I think the investment in making sure that you understand that, fully understand the context in which you're trying to start an initiative will pay massive dividends. And I guess the second dimension of the systems insight piece is digital practice or digital work often doesn't lead to a more progressive future. Often it's work which effectively props up existing, often dysfunctional systems. And I think this is something that I see a lot within NHS Scotland, or within health and care in general, is that there's loads of really interesting things happening. Call it sort of innovation, but a lot of it tends to be absorbed back into the existing system. It doesn't really. So there's a big issue within health and care, or the power dynamic between clinician and citizen. So it's typically spoken about a very paternalistic system, where you walk into a room, someone tells you what to do, what's wrong with you, you sort of nod, and walk out with a piece of paper that tells you what to do, and you sort of can be like, it can feel very disempowering, but at the same time we're trained as patients to play into this sort of dynamic. And so, and everyone within health and care talks about a future of empowerment, of self-management, of sort of actively sort of owning your health and your well-being, and sort of, most people, and if not everyone, sort of buys into that idea generally. So within the system, there's all sorts of interesting sort of patient empowerment or citizen empowerment or citizen-facing service work happening, and then it tends to get absorbed back into the paternalistic system. And so how do you sort of avoid that, and how do you sort of generally move it into a future-facing world? And I think I don't have the answer at the moment in the context of health and care, but I think the example that really springs to mind for me of an organisation that is doing this well, it's not in Scotland, but it's in Bristol, an organisation called Watershed. It's an arts organisation, which if you look at it as a building, it's a cinema, it's a bar, and so it does the sort of the traditional arts work really well. It's a art house cinema effectively, or independent cinema, and it does that really well. But at the same time, it houses incredible sort of experimental creative practice. It incubates new forms of collaboration, and it's basically trying to play all parts of the system. It's an organization which is deliberately taking a systems thinking approach, and it's been influenced a lot by some of you in the room might be familiar with the organization up in Aberdour, just up by St Andrews, called the International Futures Forum, who are a sort of a futures think tank, if you like, and they have a model called the Three Horizons model, which is a really powerful way of understanding systems from a futures perspective. And the IFF have worked really closely with Watershed over the years, for over 10 years actually. I think that's happened, and it's really sort of led to, by taking a systems approach, again, like taking a systems approach can feel like, I've been in rooms where I've been sort of arguing for taking a systems approach, and then people just look at me and say, you need just stop mucking about, stop sort of contemplating your own navel and get on with it and deliver something. A lot of the time I sort of have to fight quite hard for whether it's sort of really deep user research or deep sort of systems research before we decide what the right thing to do is. because a lot of the system, the traditional sort of system, just wants delivery, and the tension of someone sort of looking to be more progressive is to make sure that the delivery is something that sort of leads toward the future rather than just supports the old. So those are that was the sort of the currency of systems insight. And the final one is slide 14, which is just a bit more close to home, really, which is just like the currency of energy and personal energy, because when you're working in digital stuff and you're working in an organization or a system where there's a lot of friction and it's really hard to get any traction, it can be really draining to constantly be sort of, sometimes it feels like you have to be an activist, and like the great thing about an activist is that you really believe in your cause and there's a lot of energy, and but the hard thing about being an activist is that it's really hard to sustain that over time, because it leads to burnout and disillusionment, and so I guess my invitation is to sort of those people who sort of in the room who are sort of maybe sort of resonate with the idea of sort of having to be an activist for the work that you do, or progressive digital practice within third sector organizations, is to really take care of yourself, and whether it's through communities like through this one, or whether it's just through sleeping well. I think there can be I found it too much in the arts. I found it too much because in the arts there's this idea of the starving artist, right? This is sort of cliche idea of the sort of the artist in the garret, sort of who wears with pride the fact that they don't earn any money and they're sort of struggling, because that's all part of being the artist, and that pervades the cultural sector of like and sort of people feel like, oh, I should always be a little bit in pain because then I know that I'm doing it right. And again, I think that's sort of quite a pervasive but unfortunately a little bit toxic view within the arts. And I think I don't know the third sector as well, but I think just from my own experience of trying to make change happen is that it can be incredibly draining, and often it's important to have strategies and communities that allow you to re-energize and bring the mojo back, and if there's too much, sometimes there are times in the past where the barriers have been so high, you just have to know when to walk away as well, because there are times where I just realized I didn't want to be that guy who was just like constantly knocking his head against the wall, when it was too difficult to do. So that was my sort of final invitation or final thread around making sure that we all look after ourselves whilst doing this work. So that was it, really. There was a final slide, but it's just like any other questions and stuff. So yeah, I went a bit longer, Ross, than I thought I was going to, but that's me really and the sound of my own voice and stuff.
That was excellent. I'm just going to hand over to the audience because I'm conscious of time and we're finishing up at 3 o'clock today. So any questions from anyone out there?
I'm enjoying everyone's backgrounds.
I know, there's some good backgrounds.
Some good wallpaper happening.
Everyone's maybe terrified because they saw the tweet that I sent the other day that chastised people who don't ask questions and just make long statements instead. But I won't shout at anyone.
We got a hand.
Keith here.
Hey, Keith.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I really liked some of the things you were saying about separating digital from technology and turning these business conversations or technology-focused conversations around to the human elements, because they are just as important. And although I recall, I think you said it doesn't always work, especially in that latter one. Do you have any suggestions if you find yourself in that spot where people are intent on talking about the business or the technology aspects? how you can draw in that sort of human aspect. I mean, it's obviously a huge part of doing design of any kind, but I mean, how can you turn a scenario which you feel needs to be more about the people and needs to be more about the users and needs to be more about the staff experience? Have you got any like concrete or thoughts on how you can make that happen from your experience?
You can, so I guess sometimes you can do like the things I've done in the past. So especially when sort of setting up or when setting up a project, is making space for something like a sort of hopes and fears exercise, which you might be defining a technology system for endocrinologists as a random example, which I've done recently. But then you could also in that same session talk about, okay, to me, like let's log all the hopes and fears we have for this project. And then that just gives a space for that more human side. And what you find is that, especially if you do it in a group, even on a Miro board or in this environment, right? Your most sort of like hard-nosed technocrat person in the room, just by seeing that other people are talking about, actually, like, I'm so tired of seeing things start but not finish, or like I'm just worried that this is just another project that's not gonna go anywhere. And so just by them seeing that, they might not become your best friend, you know, like that's not the intention, but at least recognizing that there's a human aspect to this. And what you'll find is that as soon as you open that space out, people really respond to it and they step into it. And I think that's all it takes. And so just like, whether it's to balancing in, I think it's the example I had with Kath was different because I knew her. We had the trusted relationship where I could have a quite sort of full on chat with her. And whereas when I think today of the people I have most challenges with within the health and care system, where we're completely on different wavelengths, it would just go terribly if I took that approach one-to-one. So I think but then at the same time you can target someone. So it's something I've done before. So we all have a nemesis, right? So I remember I was doing a workshop with my nemesis walked in, right? And I sort of did what I described, where like we ran a conversation which I knew that they wouldn't necessarily take part in, but by being present in its presence, they were affected by it, and they saw a little bit more where I was coming from. Because before we were just talking about, like, I was talking about user-centered design, and they were talking about back-end technology systems, and we were just clashing. And so by them being in a room where 2/3 of the people were like, yeah, this is really interesting, let's have them in. So maybe Keith's onto something, you know what I mean? Like, so that would be sort of one thing. But I think just a simple sort of hopes and fears thing. And also, I don't know whether, again, within projects, something we do within NDS is, just because of the nature of our teams, is that we do really regular sort of retrospective, sort of agile style retros, where we do like every 2 weeks, we do a what went well, what didn't work well, what do we do? And naturally what comes up in that, sometimes it's super technical, sometimes it's super emotional and human, but the spaces for all of those things are open in that. And so having those kinds of structures that allow sort of learning cycles, make space for those things, and making and trying to get there and get them. So
that answer your question, Keith?
In many ways, yeah. I've experimented doing sort of, we're not a software company, so we don't do like sprint retros per se, but I've dabbled with using a bit of the 6 hats thing in a post-mortem. The bonus 6 hats, the emotional, factual, these things,
nice.
with mixed success. So you're commenting about maybe doing a hopes and fears at the outset, maybe that's more about framing it at the beginning. So that's helpful. Thanks. Yeah.
Cool.
Sorry, I'll clear some space for somebody else to speak now.
Yeah. So we've got a wee bit of time. So Jane was going to ask a question, then Nessa had a point in chat that might be worth picking up. So Jane, do you want to come on just now? You did have your hand up. Either that, you were scratching yourself, and you definitely had your hand up. That's good. Right, okay.
I was really interested in the point that you were saying that often when you're in the process of accelerating change through digital technology, that it can very easily get absorbed back into a dysfunctional system. I work for a culture and leisure trust, and I'm really redesigning our library service, and that is a big concern for me as we reopen, is having accelerated some fairly impressive changes in a very short period of time, is when we start to reopen, is actually that being absorbed into a fairly dysfunctional way of working. And I just would be interested in what your tips as to how to stop that, other than not restarting anything, which is sort of not really possible at the moment.
Yeah, and we're facing the same problem with it. We're facing the same issue within health and care, right? So like the fact that so many virtual appointments are happening in hospital appointments. So at the start of, I think, so how do you keep that? How do you not just default back to sort of conventional outpatient clinics and stuff when venues reopen? So it's sort of similar-ish analog, I guess. And the sort of I think that it's hard to sort of, I'm not going to give you a magic answer to that, but I think the thing that I think is interesting for our context is prioritizing what people want, because like rather than what the organization wants, because actually, so again, I'm just using this example, but I don't know what the obviously library services is outside my knowledge, but I think the fact that someone can have a virtual appointment, even for something like optometry and something quite sort of, you think you'd have to be in the room, then and how accessible that is, and how it allows people not to spend half a day traveling, and all the good reasons why you can use those kinds of virtual appointments, and using those as the drivers for making those the default. So the opportunity within NHS is to like, can remote patient experiences become default as opposed to the exception post COVID, or at least a default option. So you can choose between with equal availability. And for that to happen, yeah, you need all the technology bits to work and to be available, but also you need to be focused on the user. What is the user need, like, and because people have been surprised actually, like how much they, like, even clinicians are being surprised at how better they thought it was going to be than their sort of fears beforehand. So again, this is tricky. This is the tricky bit, Jane, which is the people making the decision are by definition the system, and they have to deprioritize themselves, which isn't. So the more data you have from on the citizen experience side of why the new service is better or different, or the value of it that you can actually point to, otherwise you will default back to the previous system, I think.
Thank you, Rohan. Right, we've got a wee bit of time. Nessa where did you go, Nessa? Oh, you're still there. Sorry, I'm trying to look through all the squares of people and then I spotted you. Do you want to jump on?
Yeah, I was just wondering really, a lot of it resonated with me. I work for the tech team in Scottish Government, but I sit within the International Exchange team. So it's kind of a arm's length in some ways. And I have a lovely opportunity to do lots of knowledge exchange stuff, but I see the same things over and over again, which is the fear by very senior people who have come into an organization not through any kind of tech or digital pathway, but feel really nervous if you can peel back that layer about making those decisions, which are sometimes extremely expensive, complex, and they will have people inevitably arguing back with them, why are you doing it this way? Why are you not just investing in more human bodies, who don't get it? So the fear, to me, is partly also linked to the inability I see sometimes in myself and sometimes in colleagues, and quite senior colleagues, to actually talk about what they're doing in a way that people understand. And that probably sounds really obtuse or overly simplistic, but talking to people who are end users, who are service users, talking to people who are practitioners, talking to people who are scientists, talking to people who are academics, and have no capacity to moderate the way they speak and to explain, or to come up with something, really think about what they're trying to deliver and come up with some key, simple ways to explain that to everybody, so they don't have to moderate between different groups of people. And I see that still quite a lot, and that, well, freaks me out a bit, to be honest with you, because you can't get the message. If you can't get the message over, the service could be beautiful, but nobody will take it. So I still see that. And the final thing was a random one, because I organise Digital Health and Care conference at the end of the year with a lot of other people. I was thinking about your digital therapy sessions that you mentioned with the arts. I'm wondering if there was any way, without food, we would have to bring your own dinner and do it virtually. If there was any way we could offer that to some digital leaders in health and care in Scotland to do it at the end of the year. So that makes
Yeah, Nessa, I'm happy to talk to you about that, because we've been in touch about the event before. So yeah, happy to explore that.
That's it. Those were my thoughts. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. What I'm going to suggest, because we're like at 1 minute to, and so we're going to have to wrap up because Rohan's got another meeting at 3 o'clock, is I'm going to suggest you shamelessly harass him on Twitter. So do you want to tell everyone your Twitter username, Rohan, and then we can...
Yeah, I'll just, it's just Rohan underscore, hang on.
24 a week? Is it?
21 awake.
21 a week, yeah.
I see a question from Chloe. Hey, Chloe, I've met you in Watershed in Bristol actually years ago. I really loved your work, so I'll make sure I answer your question and maybe message you about it, because I think I follow you on Twitter anyway. So